How about now?
Yes.
Cool, perfect. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our basics of beekeeping presentation. This is going to be a live webinar. So everyone's microphone and camera are automatically turned off in a way to preserve the recording as well as the bandwidth for this presentation. If you have any questions or comments as we go along, you can drop them in the chat, and I just changed it so everyone should be able to access the chat now. We will use the chat primarily for all of the questions throughout this presentation. If you have questions as we go along, you can put them in the chat and I will help Amy keep an eye on them as she's presenting. So we might either address your question as we move through the presentation, or we will wait until we get to that spot in the presentation. Okay, we've got a few kind of introductory housekeeping slides to share with you, and then we will turn it over to our presenter for this evening. So tonight's project is a partnership between our program, Cornell Cooperative Extension, Southwest New York Dairy, Livestock, and Field Crops program, which we'll share a little bit about, and Cornell Small Farms Veterans Education Project, FarmOps. FarmOps is an amazing program for veterans in New York State that offers many different opportunities, and their main website is listed here. On the next slide, I have some examples of ways that you can interact with FarmOps if you're new to FarmOps. So they partner with other programs like ours across the state to offer educational opportunities. They offer scholarships for events and trainings and certification programs that might be helpful for you and your farm. They have several resources that are geared directly towards veterans, and they help share farm stories, offer farm tours on other veteran farms, and build a network for you to learn together. Nina Saley, who is on our webinar tonight and whose information we'll be sharing with you, heads up the FarmOps program. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out directly to her. And most importantly, if you're not already on the New York State Farmer Veteran email list, you can join for free. And information for joining that's here, but we will also be including it in the follow-up email, which you will be sent following tonight's presentation. A little bit about our program. We have been partnering with FarmOps for several years now to offer seminars on a variety of different topics. Many of those seminars are available on our YouTube channel. If you use YouTube regularly, you can subscribe, or you can visit our channel at your leisure. And we have different playlists on different topics on all things related to agricultural production. So be sure to check that out. It's a great resource database. Okay, our program is a part of Cornell Cooperative Extension. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides low-cost research-based educational information to farmers all across New York State as New York State's land-grant university. We cover the Southwest New York region through a partnership between Cornell University and the Cornell Cooperative Extension Associations of Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, Erie, and Steuben County. If you're located within our region and you would like resources and assistance following tonight's seminar, please feel free to reach out. If you're not located in our region and you would like for us to point you in the right direction, we can do that. So there's cooperative extension offices and regional teams all across the state that are all here to help you. And most of their programs are free or very low cost. If you're interested in keeping in touch with our program, we offer education on dairy, livestock, field crops, and farm business management. Amy Barkley will be tonight's main instructor speaker. She is our team's livestock specialist. We jokingly consider bees livestock on our team because Amy is also an outstanding beekeeper. So we like to utilize her information and her knowledge and her experiences. So if you have questions about bees, just make sure you call and ask about questions about tiny cows, and we'll be able to help you very easily. I am Caitlin Wally, and I am our farm business management specialist on our team. So I assist farms with all of the paperwork parts, business planning, financial analysis, marketing, all of the things that we don't actually want to do on our farm. So both of us are here to help you, but Amy is definitely our beekeeping expert on our team. And we're really, really grateful for her to share her time and her expertise for tonight's program. I think, just a couple other housekeeping things. This is for educational purposes only. We do talk a little bit about regulations, financial considerations, and offer kind of like what the laws are and our interpretation of them in New York State. So if you are outside of New York State, please check in with your own state's laws and regulations for beekeeping and bee production. And just note that everything included here tonight is for educational purposes only. If you have any tech questions along the way, and let me put this number in the chat for everybody, please feel free to call or text me and I will address them as we go. So if for some reason you lose all of your audio, you get kicked off and you can't log back in, whatever it is, please feel free to give me a call or a text and I can help troubleshoot you to get you back onto the webinar while Amy is presenting. I think that that's it. So follow up after Amy's presentation, everybody will receive an email over the next couple of days with a recording of this presentation. We're going to talk about a zillion different resources because this is an introductory presentation. So we will offer you next steps for more education, as well as resources that you have access to for free that are all online. So the email will have lots of really important links along with the recording and what we talk about tonight. Additionally, there is a follow-up survey that we ask for at the end of every seminar, and it will automatically pop up once we close the Zoom meeting. Once we get to the end, I will drop the link for the survey in the chat box, and it will also be included on the email that gets sent out to you. One of the questions that we ask is to find out more about other topics that you might want to learn about. If you were hoping to learn about something tonight that we didn't have enough time to cover, whatever it is. So please do include information about other topics that you would like to learn about, because that's how we decide what we're going to teach next. So it's really important that you complete that feedback survey and we really appreciate it. All right, Amy, I think that's the end of my spiel. So I will go ahead and turn my stuff off. I'll holler if there's any questions that come through, but otherwise, you go ahead and teach about those tiny cows with wings. Thank you.
Tiny cows with wings that live in herds of 40 to 80,000
Yes.
per hive.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Those ones. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. So, hi everybody, Amy Barkley, livestock specialist. Beekeeping was one of those things that I always wanted to get into when I was younger, but we never really had the resources or the opportunity, or we're living in an area where I could make that happen. And when I moved to Western New York 5 years ago, the owner of the house said, "Hey, we're selling some extra stuff, including a ranger, a picnic table, and 2 hives. Do you want them?" And I said yes. And he priced those at about $500, which, as you'll learn, was a bit of a steal. But I had no idea what I was getting into. And so 5 years later, I have made pretty much every mistake you could probably make as a beginning beekeeper. And I have filled my brain with all of the knowledge. And so what I bring to you today is a 30,000-foot overview of beekeeping and a little bit of caution and a little bit of the dose of reality that I got the hard way after I paid $500 for my hives. And through this presentation, you may say, yes, let's own bees. Or you may say, no, I think I'm going to wait a little bit. And either choice is absolutely fine. I just want to provide you with the resources to help make that decision. So today we're going to talk about equipment needs and approximate costs, because before you get into anything, you should know about what this hobby is going to cost you. If you're going to make this an enterprise, this is really important to put into your enterprise budget, and Caitlin will talk a little bit about that kind of stuff at the end of the presentation. Then we'll talk about how to get bees, the basics of bee biology, and how you manage your hives throughout the season based on their biology. And then we'll get a little bit into the selling honey products and bees themselves and follow up the follow-up survey that Caitlin talked about. Before you get started, don't do what I did. Don't just get bees and make it work, because it probably won't work. Raising bees is an exceptionally challenging, mentally stimulating, and super fun hobby. I encourage you to listen to, read, watch, and understand what these animals are and how they function and why we do what we do prior to getting them. Getting a hive of bees is not as easy as just dropping them in a hive and letting them go. It takes constant work, and it is a constant learning process. I would say they're probably the most challenging livestock I've ever raised. So take that as you will. I would say that raising bees today is much more difficult than it was back before we had this little tiny bug called Varroa destructor, which is one of the main causes of colony collapses here in the United States. It was introduced in 1987. And so when I tell my dad about my bees, I'm like, oh, Dad, I had a 50% survival. I'm thrilled. He goes, what do you mean? I had 100% survival in the 70s. I was like, in the 70s, Dad, in the 70s, before Varroa came in. So beekeeping was a super easy hobby and everybody did it and almost everybody was successful. But now we have this disease pressure, the parasite pressure from Varroa, and these really weird weather extremes caused by our changing climate. And those climate extremes can cause a perfectly fine, undiseased hive to die. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. I want to introduce you to the first suite of beekeeping resources, and I highly, highly encourage you to find somebody who keeps bees and ask them if they're willing to mentor you. I would choose somebody who's at least 3 years into their beekeeping adventure, just because at that point they've probably seen a lot, they've got over their beginner's luck, and now they're really trying to work through things and they know whether or not they'll be a good mentor to you. Choose a mentor who's local to you if you can. My first mentor was in Pennsylvania, and while it was only about 3 hours away from where we live currently, his climate was still very different than ours, and a lot of the things that he taught me were things that didn't work here. So while he gave me a good base and he gave me some bees and it was wonderful, I had found another mentor here in Western New York, and then I started finding mentors outside of Western New York at some of the different resources that I'll share with you. I would also try to target some reliable and research-based information for you to start doing your research on. And a couple of those things through Cornell are the Dice Lab for honeybee studies. So they do a lot of work in regards to different management techniques and disease mitigation and honey extraction and queen rearing and all sorts of stuff like that. And then they have general beekeeping resources on their pollinator network. So I would suggest you start there, and we'll share their beekeeping calendar with you today so you can get a taste of what they have available. All right, so let's talk equipment. With beehives, you have a series of beehives to choose from. Langstroth equipment is probably the most common, the most interchangeable, and the cheapest of all the different equipment types. There are long hives, there are tall hives, there are flow hives, there are hives that are made out of Legos, there are hives that are made out of plastic boxes. But the Langstroth, which are typically a 10-frame wooden hive, are what is most typically used for commercial and backyard beekeeping. These are made up of different parts, and I've included the different parts in this diagram because listing them all I felt was a lot. So you'll start with a base. And where we are, where we receive a lot of snow, it's really important to keep that hive elevated off the ground. So you'll have some sort of, I put mine on cinder blocks. Other people use cinder blocks with pipes running through, like metal pipes, so that they can raise those hives a little taller. Some people have stands. You can buy stands or you can build them out of wood. Whatever, just keep them off the ground because you want to be able to allow airflow in and through the hive, especially in the wintertime when the snow piles up. And you don't want to do what I just had to do, which is dig 2 foot of snow out from around your hives. You'll have to do a little bit of that, but you'll do less of that if you put your hive on a hive stand. Next, you'll have an entrance reducer that is going to help manage airflow throughout the hive and manage pressure from robbers and things like mice that want to try to climb in. And then usually in these hives, you'll have brood boxes, and we have different sizes. We have smalls, mediums, and deeps. The deeps, I think, are about 16 inches deep. Mediums are, I think, somewhere around 8, and the smalls are smaller than that. But each of those hive bodies allows you to do different things. So you can manage your hive with different size boxes. Some people choose to do the mediums because it's easier to lift. When you get these boxes together and the bees are in there and they are packed full of honey, each of these boxes, let me pull out my pointer here. Each of these boxes weighs about 100 pounds. So you've got to be confident that you're able to push, pull, lug, move, tip those boxes in order to get inside the different layers of the hive to do your hive inspections, which will be every 10 to 14 days during the beekeeping season. On top of the brood boxes, you can have one or two, depends on your management style. You'll have a queen excluder. This prevents the queen, who is a bigger bodied bug, from moving up into the honey box and laying eggs in there because she will, and that makes a mess. So we put a queen excluder down, and then we have a honey box, which can either be a medium or a shallow box, or if you're doing cut comb honey, you could put a medium box with cut comb frames in it. There's a whole bunch of options there. And then you'll have an inner lid, which protects that whole stack of boxes, and then an outer lid, which is further protection, and it has a little space that allows bees to move in and out of the hive from the top, called the top entrance, as well as the bottom entrance, and it also allows for air to move in, out, and through the hive. The cost of this setup, I just looked at the cost from one of our local beekeeping sites, and it's about $400 per hive, depending on if you want to put it together yourself, if you want it already put together, if you want it painted, and how many boxes you want. What I didn't include in this presentation set is the cost of the bees themselves. You can buy a package of bees. We'll talk about packages and nucleus colonies. Package of bees costs around $150 to $180, and a nucleus colony costs anywhere from, if you have somebody nice and local who knows you, $175 up to $225 or so. $250. So, but you get different things with those different prices. Personal protective equipment is really, really important when you work with bees. And I react aggressively to bee stings. I do not like bee stings. They do not like me. I get giant welts. I have an EpiPen. I also encourage you to have an EpiPen on you in your house if you work with bees, even if you're not highly allergic. If a friend or neighbor comes over and they are, and your bees come through and they sting them, you want to be able to make sure that they can be treated. EpiPens are now pretty cheap. They're about $5. So for personal protective equipment, a lot of folks will say, oh, you just need a veil, and which is this part, the part that goes over your head. It's net so that the bees can't get it and sting your face. And then you need a jacket. I think you need a little bit more than that. I am personally the one on the left-hand side of this. So I wear a full bee suit. It zips around my head, down my front. My legs are in boots, so I stuff the suit into my boots so the bees can't crawl down and up into my suit from there. And if I have a really aggressive hive that I'm working with, I duct tape my wrists to my kidskin gloves, and I duct tape where my connection is between the body of the suit and my helmet. That might seem extreme, but I've had very angry bees get in my suit before, and it is not a fun time. Kid skin gloves, I say kid skin gloves, goat kid skin gloves. You can get them relatively inexpensively. They're really nice because they stretch and move with your hand, and they don't allow the bee's stinger to come through and sting you. Some people use nitrile gloves. I like the extra protection of kid skin. The costs of getting all of those things for your bee suit are anywhere from $100 if you just want the veil and the gloves, to $300 if you're going to get everything on this list. Other equipment that you need to get started, that includes things like a hive tool. So this piece of equipment, which you use to break apart hives and pull out frames, which are where the bees actually put their baby bees and put their honey and put their bee bread, so that you can go ahead and look at them during your hive inspections. This tool, then you have a smoker. You'll want to smoke the bees to encourage them to settle down prior to breaking into their hive. The smoke just gives them a calming effect. You'll need that. You'll also need a Varroa check of some kind. Now, this can be a mason jar with screen on the top that you can do powdered sugar roll with, or it could be something like a Varroa check like this device, which is a patented device, but it allows you to use rubbing alcohol to do your mite checks. You need something to do mite checks because you'll be doing those every 2 weeks from May to October. The other thing you'll probably want to have is a feeder of some kind. This is an in-hive feeder, but there's exterior feeders, there are top feeders. So I just put an average cost one on here. And then you'll also want to think about winter feeding. In our climate, especially if you're going to take honey, you'll need to feed back some of the energy that you took via honey, just so that those bees can make it through the winter. So this is not, obviously, I'm not endorsing this particular brand, but this is a Hive Alive fondant patty. You can buy them pre-made, or you can make them yourself. So there's also other methods to use, like sugar, hand-pail method, other things I'm not going to get into right now, but essentially you need something to feed those bees in an emergency situation. The cost of these are $100 to $300. When it comes to extraction equipment, you're going to need something to get the bees out of the box that you're going to extract honey from. If you've got a hive of 80,000 bees, just say, over 3 boxes, so 2 brood boxes and a top box, you've got somewhere around 25,000 bees that are hanging out in that top box, and you don't want them there if you're taking honey out. It's going to be a bad situation. So you'll want to push those bees into the lower level of the hive, and you do that by using either a bee escape or a fume board. And then you'll need an uncapping tool, like this one up here. It could be a tool with little ridges on it. It could be a hot knife, but something to take the cappings off the honey prior to putting it in the extractor. You'll need a cheap well, not cheap extractor. You'll need an extractor that fits what your goal is. I bought a cheap extractor, and it's a 2-frame, it's manual, very bare bones, but I can utilize it, and it wasn't that expensive, all things considered. You'll also need a food grade bucket, and it has to have a gate on it, so you need to buy this separately from a bee supply company. This allows you to take the honey in and out of the bucket once it's full. Once this bucket is full, it weighs a lot. Honey is about 1.5 times the weight of water. So imagine a 5-gallon bucket of water, multiply that by 1.5, and that's a bucket of honey. So it's very, very heavy. These gates are really important for bottling. And then you'll need a strainer set if you're doing raw honey. This is the most basic way to do honey is raw. You'll strain it through to remove things like propolis and bees that get caught in the honey when you're extracting, and beeswax, particles that don't come off during the capping process. So with all that together, your approximate cost is $250 for the bare bones setup of honey extraction equipment. Okay. So I'm going to move into understanding bee biology super quick, because this is really crucial to understanding how things work. And if you're a new beekeeper and you walk outside like I did today and you see this picture on the right-hand side, you're going to think, oh my word, my bees are dying. Because you'll start to hear of things like bee diarrhea and colony collapse disorder, and those things are really scary. But knowing bee biology, when I walked outside and I saw this, I was like, oh, thank goodness they're alive. So once you know that, you won't be as surprised of some of the things that you see. The Cornell Pollinator Network is that resource that I keep alluding to, and that can be found at this link, which will also be sent in the email recording, or sorry, the email that Caitlin will send out following this webinar. So what do we want bees to do? We want bees to live, we want bees to make honey, and we want bees to make more bees. Pretty straightforward. Now the bees want to do pretty much the same thing and spread their genetics. So bees are generally very prone to swarming because that's how they spread their genetics. They break their hive in half flies off with the queen, and then the current hive just replicates makes a new queen, essentially. And then those genetics can proliferate in the environment. They also make drones. Drones are kind of a waste of time for the bees if you're considering you want them to go out and collect nectar, because they're feeding those baby boy bees pollen and nectar and not flying out to get more because they're feeding these baby boy bees, but they want those baby boy bees to go out, fly, and mate other queens to spread their genetics around. So we're constantly working through bee biology and with bee biology to make beekeeping happen. And when you keep bees, you really have to have a goal in mind. Do you want to make honey or do you want to make bees? You can do both once you're an experienced beekeeper. It is challenging when you're starting out to do both. I would say your failure rate is higher if you try to do both. This is something I would get into in another webinar because it's a lot. But you need to make your decision. Usually in your first year, your goal is to make bees. Build that hive as big as you can and make sure they can get through the winter. If your goal is to make honey, you're still going to need that first year for those bees to build up a colony that is sustainable enough that it will come into the next spring roaring and strong to collect that spring honey flow and make you honey in the spring and maybe into the fall. So make this decision prior to deciding what your management technique is going forward for that year. When you're deciding what to get in terms of your bees, genetics do matter. So origin matters and genetics matter. There are quite a few types of genetics of bees here in the US, And those are developed in different parts of the country for different purposes. We have bees like the Carniolan, the Sacatres, Russians, Italians. They're probably ones that you'll hear of most often if you're buying purebred bees. And each of those have different characteristics. One of them may have a really uh, early egg-laying queen, and so her population is going to build up really quick in the hive in March and April. You might have another type that builds up later, but has more of a resistance to varroa mites. So there's all these pros and cons with the different purebred bees. You could also just purchase local bees, which maybe started as a purebred bee, but then over time mated with other bees, became more naturalized. And as you have a beekeeping yard and you gain more experience, what you realize is I'm going to breed those bees to make more bees that are my best survivors and my best producers, and maybe my most gentle bees. So when you buy bees from a local beekeeper, for instance, you might not know the genetics. So you ask things like, are these acclimated to where I live? Are these good producers? Are they calm, etc.? We can get bees from suppliers all over the country. They don't necessarily say, oh, you're from New York State, I'm from California. I'm not going to ship bees because I don't think they'll do well for you. They're going to sell you bees. So you've got to pay attention to where your bees are coming from if you're ordering them in the mail. Bees from the deep south or the west coast don't usually have the genetics to do really well in our climate, especially where I am in Western New York. We get a lot of snow, a lot of cloudy days, very short blooming season, and so they're already up against a wall when they get here in terms of their genetics, and then they're challenged further with the environment. That is something that we want to avoid because it just sets us up for disappointment later. When you're a first timer getting bees, there are a couple of different options. It'd be really nice if we could all get established hives like I did. But if you get established hives, you've got to make sure that they are disease-free, you've got to make sure that they're strong, and you've got to ask about the background of those hives and why is the person getting rid of them. There are bee diseases, like there are other livestock diseases, that you can spread to your bee yard, and we want to try to avoid that as much as we can. So for most first timers, you're not going to get established hives. That they're not really available and it really doesn't make sense. What you are likely to see available are nucleus colonies, which we call nukes, or packages. Nukes are this one on the bottom here, the image from Better Bee. They are the gold standard for beginners. What it is it's 5 frames of baby bees, nurse bees, forager bees, and some resources like bee bread, which is pollen that the bees collect to feed their babies, and honey. And once you have that, you just set those frames in a hive, you're good to go. The bees will continue to draw out wax, they'll continue to do the thing. They've already got an accepted queen. Things are good. Packages, while they're a little cheaper, they're a challenge because the way that they are put together is the company that's selling you the package has all these hives. They literally weigh out 2 to 3 pounds of bees, put them in a box, and then stick a queen in there. That queen is not accepted. That queen may not be accepted. And there is no telling how much damage was done to those bees as they were dumped into this box. They are stressed because they don't have any comb to do their thing on. They don't know who this queen is. And so it's a little more challenging for you to get started with a package from the bee biology perspective. The other part of this is you're usually dumping those bees into brand new equipment. That means honey frames without drawn out comb. Drawn out comb takes a lot of energy. It's something like 8 to 10 pounds of honey per pound of wax. And when we think about the amount of flowers that a bee needs to visit to make the honey to make the wax, they're up against a wall for that first growing season. So I highly recommend nucleus colonies. Do a package if you have some drawn out comb already in your hive and you're willing to take that risk of that queen not already being accepted by the bees in that box. Here's a general timeline if you get a package. So just say you want to do bees this year, you order a package and you say, okay, I'm going to put those in the hive April, early May. That's usually when they ship. And you're going to feed those bees. You're going to have an external feeding system. You're going to feed throughout the spring honey flow. They are probably not going to be able to get enough nectar resources from that honey flow to build out comb and store honey to build their population before the summer solstice, which is when the population starts to decline and the hive starts to prepare for winter. So you're going to need to feed. And then 2 weeks later, after you establish those bees, you're going to need to open up that hive and determine if they're drawing out comb like you want them to, and if the queen has been accepted and is laying, or if that queen's been rejected and killed. If the queen's been rejected and killed, you'll need to introduce a new queen, try again. If all is good, everything looks good in your hive, you're going to check in another 2 weeks. And then every 2 weeks following that, continue to feed so long as they take that feed. It can be exterior feed or interior feed. And so long as they take it, continue through the dearth, which is a time when the flowers are not blooming as much in July and August. And then in September, there's goldenrod and aster blooming. And they should have built up enough comb to be able to store honey for winter. Your goal with the package is to have them build out 20 frames of comb and store at least 100 pounds of honey before winter. With the packages, you probably will not get any honey. I say you may get some if you're aggressive and you take honey off and then you feed them aggressively through September, but it's not very likely and that'll just weaken them. And it's best to let them grow this year and then take honey next year when the hive gets through winter and is really strong coming into spring. If you have a nuke, the main difference is you don't really have to feed them very much. So you get them, you're not really feeding them unless they need it. You can give them some feed if they take it, give them more. But once those dandelions bloom, which is a sign of spring, or if you get your nuke after the dandelions bloom, you're good to go. Your bees are going to be able to find enough food because they already have a queen that's been laying eggs. They've got new workers coming out as nurse bees. They've got bees that are ready to fly and collect nectar. Like they're all good to go. So they are way in advance of a package. You'll continue to check those every 2 weeks, add new frames. Just say you're new. And so again, you're starting with 5 frames in your nucleus colony, but they still need to draw out comb on those other frames. So you're going to check every 2 weeks to make sure they're drawing out comb, and you're going to add comb, or sorry, drawing out comb, and you're going to add frames in strategically to ensure they draw out more comb so that you're consistently getting the packaging of honey and the birth, well, the hatching and growth of new baby bees. You are more likely to get honey in this scenario. You're less likely to stress the hive when you take honey. But there could be some challenges on the flowering season, such as extended summer months, really extended rainy months, early rainy months in the fall. That could make it so that you don't get honey. As a first-time beekeeper, don't expect to get honey your first year, is kind of the mantra here. So let's get into this Cornell beekeeping calendar, and I'm going to start with winter because that's where we are, and I'm going to move through the seasons by block into spring and through next fall and into winter again so that you understand kind of what you have to do as a beekeeper through these seasons. The Cornell beekeeping calendar breaks this down in very amazing detail of what the bees are doing, what the varroa mites are doing, because this whole process is a war against varroa mites in addition to raising the bees. So you got to manage that. And then it tells you what you have to do as a beekeeper to work with the bee biology. I've shortened this for this presentation. So let's start in winter. In the winter, the bees are at their lowest population of the season. They're in a really tight cluster. So bees have hemolymph instead of blood in their system, and they get cold below 55 degrees and they can't do anything. They kind of freeze up. Below a certain temperature, they'll die. So bees are in this cluster. They kind of vibrate together to stay warm, and if they have baby bees under them, which we call brood, they will vibrate enough to raise the temperature under them where the brood is living to 95 degrees to allow for the development of that brood. So in the winter, they're tight in a cluster. The queen is usually not laying at this point, like February, late February, early March, she is, but November, December, January, early February, she's not laying anything. The bees will continue to die off from the fall into the winter, which is how you get to your lowest population. As a beekeeper, it's my job to check the food stores, clear snow from the entrances, and check the wintering equipment. So on this hive, I have what's called, I don't wrap my hives, which is insulation that you use to wrap around the outside to help with wind mitigation. I use instead what's called a quilt box, and it's a way to mitigate moisture in my hives because in my area, I'm challenged with moisture. So I put this on the top and it helps mitigate that. And so I check that to make sure my wood chips are dry. And if they're not, I dump them out, add new ones. I'll also check their food. So underneath here, this is a feeding shim. It is just creating a space so I can put feed in there for them if they need it in an emergency. So at that point, I'll check that. And I also make sure that all of these dead bees exist. So if the hive is strong, they will be living at this point in the year and they will push their dead out through the bottom entrance and they will fly out of this top entrance to take cleansing flights where they essentially fly out, poop, and fly back. All of this brown color around this little hole that I made is essentially bee poop. It's been so cold here that the bees can't fly. So you need 55 degrees Fahrenheit to fly. So they stick their little butts out of the hole and poop outside. And that's why we see this poop around the upper entrance. So this is a healthy hive. I'm happy with it. Early spring is the riskiest time for beekeepers for colony losses. And that's because in the warm days, the bees are flying out, they're bringing in pollen, they're bringing in a little bit of nectar, but mostly pollen. Their food stores, their honey, that 100 pounds that you put them into the winter with is rapidly diminishing as the queen's laying eggs, and they're building up their population. So this is where most bees are going to starve. And we get these sudden prolonged cold snaps sometimes. So like it was 42 today, it was like 40 yesterday, 40 the day before. This weekend it's gonna get down to 7 degrees Fahrenheit and 15 degrees is a high. It's gonna be like that for 2 days and then it's gonna get warm again. So that's gonna shock the bees. If they don't go back into their cluster in time, those bees are gonna freeze and die. If we had a period where it warmed up to 50 and then it sunk back into the 20s, and the bees didn't have enough food to make it through that time period or enough bees to cover the brood that they're currently rearing out, they would die. So this is a very tricky time. Early spring's very tricky. So as a beekeeper, it's my job to continue to check their food stores, make sure they have enough food, and at this time, also putting pollen in as well as sugar so they have protein to grow their baby bees. I'm clearing snow from the entrances because we get snow through May here. I'm feeding them if they have to, if I have to, and I'm removing the winterizing equipment around early April. So if you don't do that, it can make the temperatures in the hive really wonky. It can make humidity really wonky, and the bees can build into some of those structures. So you take them off and you prepare for the spring nectar flow. When the dandelions bloom, yes, Caitlin?
Yes. There's a question, how do you check the hives for food in the winter?
Yeah, so you can get used to the weight of a hive empty, and then the weight of a hive full of 100 pounds of honey. You just kind of tip it so you lift it from the bottom, and if it's rock heavy, there's definitely enough food in there. If you can lift it pretty easily, there's probably not enough food in there. The rule of thumb that I like to share is put in feed, emergency winter feed, onto the top box. If they take it, they need it. So they will preferentially take their honey. So just put emergency feed in there if you think that they might be running low, because it's better to feed them than to let them starve.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So this picture on the right-hand side is my barns and is in between the neighbor's house and my house. And that man is a lovely, lovely man. And he lets me grow my hayfield essentially in between our houses while he keeps his grass lovely manicured. But I do this, I raise my grass really high. It's about knee high in this picture because then the dandelions can come out and I know they're flowering and I know they're providing a source of pollen and nectar for my bees. I'll see a few dandelions in my front yard, but in my side yard by my barns, this is where I start to see the population of dandelions in full, and I can say, yes, the bees have enough food out there. The dandelions blooming is an indication that there are other flowers blooming to provide enough nectar and pollen to let the bees, like they're out of the woods. Um, at this point, they're bringing in so much food so rapidly from that colony build in the very early spring that once they start feeling cramped, once the queen runs out of places to lay eggs, she is going to stop laying eggs. The bees are going to backfill all of those empty cells with honey and nectar because that's what's out there now. And they're going to say to that queen, "Hey, queen, love you long time, but it's time to spread your genetics. And she's gonna go, okay, I'm taking half of you and I'm gonna go. And so she swarms. If you manage your hives correctly, you can prevent swarms. You can make more bees by splitting them. It's a process where you make more hives with current bees that you have. Or you can add honey boxes. You'll learn the cycles of the bees. Each hive is different. Once you see they're starting to feel cramped, they'll interact a certain way with each other and with you. And you say, yep, time to put a new honey box on. So you can add a new honey box. Or if you want to really build your population of bees for, you know, maybe collecting nectar in the fall for a fall harvest of honey, you put another box on to allow the queen to lay in 3 boxes instead of 2, for instance. So those are ways to mitigate swarms. So as a beekeeper, you're so busy in spring. You're mitigating swarms. If we have some more of those cold snaps, you're continuing to feed them. If there's like 5 to 7 days of cold wind, rain, you'll want to make sure that you're feeding them because they're taking so much food at this point to sustain their population that they can actually starve as they're collecting food. Start checking for mites at this point. Mite populations start to build in the spring. You're going to check for those every 2 weeks and treat as needed. You will then do full hive inspections every 10 to 14 days. And 30,000 foot overview, what a hive inspection is you're breaking that hive down, opening every single frame, taking every single frame out of the hive box, looking for how is the brood? How is the brood pattern? Is the queen laying? How do the bees look? Do they look healthy or do they look sick? How much food is in there? How much bee bread is in there? Are there swarm cells? Are there queen cells? Are there supersedure cells? These are all parts of beekeeping that you'll learn and that you'll look for upon every hive inspection throughout the spring season. As I said, swarm management is key here. And you'll continue swarm management into mid to early summer. At this point, the bees are at peak population, and as a beekeeper, you've gone through every hive inspection, you've done the addition of hive bodies if you need, or splitting of hives into other smaller hives if needed. And the bees are saying, okay, we're at peak population, we're bringing in as much honey and nectar, or pollen and nectar as we can. So we're going to make boy bees to spread our genetics. So this is the point where they start to make lots of drones. And they will build them and send them out into the world to spread their genes. Midsummer, we start to enter these hot, dry spells that can reduce nectar and pollen availability. So don't be surprised if you have a lot of honey going into spring, or sorry, going into summer, and then part of the way through summer, you're like, yeah, I'm going to harvest that now. You go into the box and there's nothing there because the bees have used it all for themselves. It's okay. It's just part of how things work. However, if you have a really extended period of bad weather, hot, dry, not a lot of other resources, robbing starts to become a problem where other hives, whether domestic or wild, will come in. And if they find a weakness in your colony for whatever reason, whether it be from disease, low population, you lost a queen and they're rebuilding, so they're using resources to rebuild. Both honeybees and wasps and hornets can come in, completely decimate your hive, kill all of the population in there, and take all of your honey within 2 days. So you'll have to look out for that. So in addition to all the things I mentioned for the last slide of what you do as a beekeeper, you'll also have to do some hive protection and reconnaissance should you have robbing activity. In the late summer, August, September, the bee populations are starting to shrink. We've hit the summer solstice. The bees are like, it's time to make our winter bees, which are hardier bees that will live longer than the 6 weeks of a summer bee. They will live the entire 6 months of winter. The honey is starting to be stored for winter. Sources are diminishing though. If you have really good goldenrod and aster flow, this is really good for you, and really good for a buildup. But if those flower sources flower when it's really hot and dry, you may not get a lot. So it's really important in the summer to feed as much as you can into August and September so that the bees can take that feed in. This is usually liquid feed. Take that into the hive, cap it off as honey, and prepare it for winter. So again, you're going to continue everything you've been doing up to this point during the beekeeping season, the active beekeeping season. You might have some honey flow, you might not, it all depends. So these are two of my hives. This is a windbreak. I can tell this is September-ish because I've got goldenrod and some milkweed blooming around here. And this hive on the left is one that went gangbusters. So I gave them, this is 2 brood chambers where the baby bees are being made. This is actually a honey super because they had so much honey that they built out a whole box of honey before I realized they had it. So in order to keep them from swarming, I managed them that way. And then I put another honey super on because they were just going bananas. This hive down here had different genetics. They're not the same genetics. And they did not build up very well. They did not bring in enough honey during the spring season. There was a dearth. They didn't grow very well. So they're only in one hive and they don't have a super because they don't need it. So at this point, the hives have the most mites in them. And you'll need to continue testing and treating for them. If you do not treat by Labor Day, it is likely that your bees will succumb to diseases due to mites. So keep that in mind. In the fall, the queen's gonna stop laying eggs in October. The bees are gonna start to cluster on the cold days. The robbing continues mostly by yellow jackets at this point. And so you're gonna make sure that you're preparing the bees for winter. So you're gonna stop your full inspections. You're gonna stop your mite treatments, unless you do some winter mite treatments. You will move to inspecting for fall stores, making sure they have 100 pounds of honey to go into the winter. You'll monitor their health and make sure you're not seeing any viral diseases or anything within the hive. You will combine weak hives with other hives if you need to. You will combine queenless hives with other hives if you need to keep the populations high to make sure that they all make it through the winter. You'll pull off your honey boxes, put on your entrance reducers, reduce the number of brood boxes that you have. If you've built those up during the summer, you're going to take those down as the population shrinks. You're going to add your winterizing equipment and just generally get ready for that first snow of the year. And then we go back to winter again. So that's the process of beekeeping during the year. Like I said, it's a very involved process, and I did try to cheat my first couple years and thought I'm gonna do an inspection once a month. Things swarmed. I'm gonna do an inspection once a month. Mites got out of control. Hives were robbed. So you really do need to keep on top of your management. So here are some other tricky things that I decided to put in here about beekeeping. It's the inspections that need to happen regularly, of course, but queens are not infallible. You have one gravid female in a hive of 40 to 80,000 bees. Something could happen to her. So she could get killed by a robber. She could die from some other cause. Maybe she gets stuck between a frame and dies. Maybe you're doing a hive inspection, you accidentally squish her. She can swarm off with half of the hive. She can be weak, not well fertilized, and the bees in the hive go, yeah, we're gonna kill her, supersede her, and then raise a new queen. So the queen replacement process takes about 3 to 6 weeks. So once you realize you're queenless, which you'll usually see on your inspection, know that it's 3 to 6 weeks before you can get a new queen laying. And so you're set back with that hive for the season. Bees can starve even when flowers are blooming. We talked about this because of our inclement weather, extended periods, even just wind. If you have days where, just say 5 days in a row that are super windy, the bees won't fly in the heavy wind because they know they can't make it. They're little bees. They know that their bodies are going to be taken away by wind currents. They won't fly and they can starve. Or those heavy rain events or snow events that are out of season, that sort of thing. Here's Varroa Destructor. I decided to give it its own slide. These little tiny bugs that look just like little drops of coffee on the back of this bee are actually varroa mites. If you start seeing varroa mites on your bees, that's a really bad thing, just FYI. But what they do is they essentially eat the wax that is covering the bee's skin, causing them to be more susceptible to disease because the wax on bees is a protective coating. So, your job is to manage those. They are in every single hive in the United States, both wild and kept. It's just that we can control their populations to not reach critical points of where they cause disease. So not only do they make the bees weak, but they also bring in viral diseases that can cause your hives to collapse. And sometimes you won't know that they have a viral disease until they go through winter and there's no other reason why they died other than what you assume is a viral disease. There are some bees, like I alluded to earlier, that are more susceptible than others. They have better grooming behaviors, some have better grooming behaviors, and some tend to be more aggressive towards humans, but better at managing mites. There is a correlation. We don't know exactly why it is, but my mean and nasty hives don't have very big mite loads and they make lots of honey. And that's what I've heard from other beekeepers as well. I'm gonna talk really, really quickly about selling things because this is why we raise bees, right? We want honey and we want an opportunity to diversify our business. So you can sell bees or you can sell honey. Selling nucleus colonies is one way that beekeepers can help manage their costs and maybe make a little bit of money on their enterprise. It's typically more profitable than selling honey. Though, if you're going to go this route, know that you do need a New York State Ag and Markets person to come out and inspect the bees for disease prior to approving you to sell bees, and that has to be renewed on an annual basis. Selling colonies could be a way to manage your population in your bee yard if you only want a certain number of bees, and or it can be a way to get others into beekeeping. So, a pretty rewarding opportunity there. And then we have selling honey. Honey is allowed to be bottled in New York State without a permit or license. You just have to have a relatively clean facility, no pests, just generally sanitary. And when you package and label it, it must be labeled with the state requirements. And that information is found at the link below. The other thing is there's a lot of honey products that you can make. Raw honey, filtered honey, pasteurized. You can cream honey now, and you can make honey candy without an additional license. What you cannot do is mix honey with things that would cause bacterial or fungal contamination. So for instance, if you've got raw honey and you want to make an orange peel creamed honey, there is a risk there that you may you're introducing orange peel, which can have mold or can grow bacteria. You're introducing that into honey, and so it could theoretically cause a problem if there was a contamination issue. You'll need a license for that. But just generally using 100% honey that you produce from your own bees and making these products, you're allowed to do that without a license. All right, Caitlin, your turn.
Perfect. So nobody took this webinar to learn more about finances and the financial pieces that come along with beekeeping, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't slide a few slides in here. So just a couple of things to know about finances for your farm if you are considering adding beekeeping. Beekeeping is a really great way to diversify your farm. So diversification on your farm looks like you're adding another thing that you're making. You're adding an additional enterprise. Beekeeping is perfect for that. It's something that you can involve your entire farm team on. It's something that, as we'll see in the next slide, consumers are super interested in. So it's a great way to diversify your farm. However, what we have found is that beekeeping is a terrible way to earn a profit. So as you all just heard from Amy, there's a high investment cost. There's a very high likelihood that it's going to fail a million different ways. And you're not even looking at earning a profit or creating a product that you're able to sell for some time. And that's if everything goes perfectly. So it's really important to think about this. And the reason that I talk about this is that sometimes we look at beekeeping as a way to enter farming or to start a farm business because it's a little bit smaller. We don't have to build pastures. We don't have to build a barn for it, right? But what we find is that beekeeping is actually not a great thing to build your farm business on, particularly in the beginning. Over time, you might find that it's very successful for you. You can continue to grow it, and that's excellent. That's what we want to see. But most likely, that's not going to happen. So I just add this in here now so that if you're thinking about raising bees and making honey products as a way to kind of build your farm or create your farm or start your farm, we just push back on it a little bit. A lot of times too, we will talk to people that say like, oh, I'm just doing this for fun. Like it doesn't have to earn a profit, and that's okay. And I think that that's where you decide yourself if raising bees for honey or for any of their products is something that you are doing to earn a profit or something that you are just doing for fun. Needing to earn a profit doesn't make you a bad person. It's what you need in order to pay your bills. If you decide that you are operating your beekeeping enterprise as a hobby, then we are going to ask you to consider what role does that play within your community for other beekeepers who are beekeeping for a profit. There are some really cool tools from Cornell's beekeeping program that Amy mentioned earlier. And one of them is an inventory and financial analysis handbook, which will be shared with you. It's a really great tool of great structure for you to look at what your costs are, what your incomes are, and if you're earning a profit and how that profit is going for you. It can also be a really good tool if you just want to kind of budget and see what this might look like for you. So we'll share this in the follow-up email. Next thing that I wanted to touch base on is marketing, which I already kind of alluded to. So there is a huge local demand for honey. It's large, it's growing as more and more people become interested in learning about where their food comes from. Honey tends to be an easy product for them to start with. Honey is also a great add-on product. So if you already have a farm business and you're selling eggs, you're selling meat, you're selling maple, adding honey to that takes up a little bit of shelf space. You can make it shelf-stable product. So from a marketing standpoint, it's excellent. It's not something that you have to get rid of right away. And it's an add-on product so that when you have a consumer coming to your farm to buy your flowers, they can grab a jar of honey. They can grab a honey product that you're making. And typically, honey has capacity for a large markup. So when we think about something like, normally I would use the example of eggs, but that's kind of a sore subject right now. So let's pretend this presentation was 6 months ago. Let's say that you're selling eggs. Eggs cost you $5, $6 to make per dozen, easy, but very rarely do consumers want to pay $5 or $6 per dozen. Again, this conversation happened 6 months ago. Honey is not that way. It does take you a lot of money to invest in honey, but once you get cruising along, your actual production costs tend to be lower, and the margin that you're able to upcharge for profit tends to be higher. But even if it has a higher profit margin, it's really hard to make enough money off of honey. Even if you're able to charge 300%, 400% profit margin on your honey, you have to think that that 400% is on a $10 jar of honey. So it's a lot of $10 jars of honey for you to earn enough money to sustain your farm budget, to sustain your household budget if you want to quit your day job and be a beekeeper. And I just like to put this in perspective because it is really, really tough to have an entire farm budget just based on honey. But demand's there. It's a great add-on product. People are looking for it. One caveat or thing that we are seeing is that if you are selling your honey as part of your business, as part of your farm business, as soon as you sell honey for money or some type of bartering, you are now in the business of honey production. Once you are in the business of honey production, you have to consider things like insurance, liability, regulations, taxes. It's a lot more than just selling your honey for cash. We see a lot of people that produce honey just as a hobby, right? So they don't have a farm business. This is just something that they do for fun. They have a little roadside stand out front where they collect cash in a tin can. And that's great. And that's really important for the local food system. But typically in that setup, you are not operating your honey production as a business. So you're able to charge a little bit less because you don't have to cover things like insurance. You don't have to cover the cost of considering your income taxes. You don't have to think about labeling your products correctly and the cost associated with that. So you're able to sell your product for a lower price, which disproportionately affects your other local competitors who are also local farmers. So if you are raising bees for honey production and you're interested in selling honey, I would encourage you to think about, like, do you actually want to sell that honey and be in the business of honey? Or is that just something that you want to do for fun and raise for yourself? What my very humble ask would be is that you don't compete. And it's not that you're doing it on purpose, it's just something that happens. But my very humble ask would be don't compete against farmers in your area that are operating as a business by selling your product for very low, because from your perspective, you don't need to make money on it, right? There's a very cool guide called Marketing Local Honey in New York State that talks about some of the marketing perks for honey, some of the regulatory requirements for honey, labeling requirements for honey, and that will be shared in your resource email as well. Next thing I just want to touch base on, because this is not something anybody thinks about when they're getting into beekeeping, are tax considerations. If you decide that you want to raise bees as part of your farm business, this all applies. If you decide that you want to raise bees just for fun, you're not going to sell a product, this stuff does not apply. So if you are raising bees as part of your farm business, this counts as a farming activity. So you're able to receive all of the tax perks, and vice versa. You have to pay taxes on any income related to the honey production or any agricultural production. The ST-125, which is the form that we use in New York State if you are purchasing products and goods for your farm business, does apply for beekeeping. So as you are investing in all of the equipment that Amy was talking about, all of the supplies that Amy was talking about, you're able to make those purchases sales tax without sales tax, utilizing that ST-125. So just a reminder that this is a qualifying farming activity. Next up is record keeping. So not only you're going to keep records of all of those checks you're going to be doing, all of the times you're interacting, all of the products that you're pulling off of the operation, but you need to keep track of all of your financial records as well for tax purposes. Selling honey as a food product is tax exempt. You do not need to collect sales tax if all you're selling are the food products. As soon as you get into any non-food products, so particularly beeswax in this topic area, if you're selling lip balms, you're selling candles, you're selling anything that's not food, you do need to charge sales tax. And I mention this because filing your sales taxes in New York State is the biggest pain in the butt ever. So if all you are selling are 5 lip balms a year that you need to collect sales tax on, don't even do it. You just keep those lip balms, you put them in your pocket, you live your best life. Do not bother doing it. So this is a consideration if you're looking at beekeeping. As soon as you start selling products from your bees that are not food, and even if you're selling the bees themselves, those are all taxable sales. So you need to go through the process of being able to collect sales tax in New York State, which is not easy. So this is just my fair warning. You all have been warned. So you keep your lip balm. Don't even bother selling it. All right, lastly, what I'm going to mention is if you're already involved in agriculture, you probably have heard of something called an ag value assessment. If you're not, we will include an article that I just wrote about this in our resources that we email out. Ag value assessment is a property tax reduction that farms that are farming for business are able to receive in New York State. Beekeeping counts as a farming activity. So if you are meeting the minimum requirements with beekeeping, great, you're able to count it. If you meet the minimum requirements for some other types of agricultural activity, and you have land on your property that is not being used for what you're qualifying your ag value assessment for, you can count up to 10 acres of land that's not being used for something else as apiary land mass, and you are able to receive the property tax reduction. So where does this apply? House lawns. Okay. So if you receive ag value assessment and your home is on your property where you are receiving ag value assessment, a lot of times the lawn and the area around the house is not something that's eligible for ag value assessment. If you have an apiary and you can document that and you can show that, sometimes you're able to get those areas that normally wouldn't qualify, you can get them to qualify for ag value assessment, which can be a perk. Okay, I think that was all of my obligatory farm business management slides. So back over to you, Amy.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I just giggle because yes, sales tax stuff is the biggest pain in the butt ever. It's necessary and it's the biggest pain in the butt ever. All right, so learning resources. These are some of the resources that I highly encourage you to look at. The Cornell Small Farms Introduction to Beekeeping course is a self-paced course that goes into much greater detail than I did today on all of the basics of bee things. So you can feel relatively confident when you get out of that course of how you're going to start managing going forward. I also recommend beekeeping books. Stories, guides are wonderful. There are some like beekeeping for dummies type books that are wonderful to use too. And In addition to those, there are some network courses on the Cornell Pollinator Network, and I've really enjoyed videos from the University of Guelph's Research Center. They are north of us, so they have given me some tips for cold weather beekeeping that I don't necessarily get from other resources. So go check them out. They're pretty cool, and they talk in a lovely accent. I also enjoy listening to podcasts. I get a lot of windshield time in my job. So Beekeeping at Five Apple Farm is one that I stumbled across. Lee is the one who does this podcast. She does it all by herself. She is a sideline beekeeper. She does it just for the genetics of the bees and for teaching people. She's in North Carolina, but she has a lot of really good tips for managing bees that you can adjust for our climate. And then another vlog that I found helpful on YouTube is JC's Bees. Jason Chrisman does that. He's out of Ohio. I found most of his stuff to be very well based in science, and he also tests out some theories to see if they work. He has a very large bee yard. So these are some things I suggest you get started in if you want to learn more. And I want to finish off with this quote. It's not my quote, it's something I've heard, and it is so true. If you ask 10 beekeepers something about bees, they're going to each tell you a different thing, and that thing works for them, and that's okay. You're going to need to do a lot of collecting of information to compile what is perfect for your environment and what your goals are. So find what works for you and go with it. Again, we encourage you to complete our survey, which will be sent out following the webinar today. I believe Caitlin's going to pop that in the chat as well, so you could just go ahead and fill that out. And we encourage you to ask any questions or make any comments, share any stories that you may have.
And then, as we mentioned too, over the next couple of days, you all will be receiving a follow-up email with the recording of tonight's seminar. Thank you, Amy, for your Tiny Cows with Wings presentation. And it'll
Anytime.
also include all of the links for everything that we talked about resource-wise tonight. We had a question, is there a good resource for hive placement on your property?
I don't think so. It's so I say that because it's a very small list of things to consider. It's Are you placing your hives in a place where hives are regulated first? Because if you're in a town, sometimes they have regulations on if you can put hives in your backyard and how many you can have. The second is generally have the entrances not facing where the prominent airflow is in storm season. So for us, that's south and west. So we have our entrances pointing east so that our bees can do the thing and they don't get rain right into the hive. And then the other thing is you'll want to have them near a windbreak so that if in bad weather, those winds come ripping through your property, that break can take away some of the challenge associated with cold air. And then have them in an area that gets a little sun in the morning and a little more shade in the afternoon. That's pretty much it.
Perfect. Lots of thank yous, but that was the only question so far. So
Mhm.
you did great. Amy was a little bit mad at me when I was like, hey, I need you to fit everything you know about beekeeping in a 1 hour presentation. Thank you.
I'm so
So
sorry.
you did a great
There's
job.
there's just so much. So beekeeping is one of those things I told Caitlin, I could probably do 15 of these on the various
Yes.
different topics around beekeeping because it is so complex and there are so many like what if scenarios associated with them. So if there's anything beekeeping related that you want to know more about, let us know and we
Yeah.
will happily share.
Yeah. Um, question, I want to grow produce. Is it good to have bees to help things out?
Yep, it's always good to have bees to help things out, especially if there's a decline of natural pollinators all over the US. Having kept honeybees helps ensure pollination. We look to these mostly for pollination services for berries and for tree fruits, but it can also be really helpful for vegetable populations as well.
Um, why not wrap in the winter?
This is the you ask 10 different beekeepers and they give you 10 different answers. So the beekeeper down the road from me, he wraps his hives, but his hives also have no windbreak. My hives have a windbreak. I'm challenged with moisture issues in my hives, and if I wrapped my hives, I would just have a chronic I would make a moist hive, and moisture kills bees. So instead I have the quilt boxes and I allow the cold air to move through the hive, which is a little detrimental to the bees, but a whole lot less detrimental than the moisture. So for me, that works. There's another beekeeper I talked to, and he says he actually uses pennies to crack open his hive and he doesn't wrap it. I was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to try that. Nope. So it all depends on where you are and what your resources are.
I think too, it's like, it's quite the adventure. I have never raised bees and Amy has thoroughly terrified me out of it. So I will just live vicariously through her. But I will say that in the farmers that we've worked with, it's quite the adventure to see like what matters and what doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Because something that doesn't matter on somebody's farm or like something that you do, you go to another person's farm and like that's considered blasphemy. And like you can't do that, it'll ruin everything, right? Like I do the exact opposite. And if I changed it, it wouldn't work. And so it's beekeeping's very interesting. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
it is. It is. And like I've shared, I feel like this whole presentation kind of was a gray cloud over
Yeah.
beekeeping. And
Yeah, it's great.
I'm not meaning to discourage you. I promise it's so, so rewarding and it is so, so hard. And I just want to make you aware that it is very hard. But very, very fun.
It's perfect. All right. So it looks like we are wrapped up with our questions for tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, Amy, for your expertise. And we will be sharing out all of this information. Once the webinar closes, the feedback survey will pop up. So please feel free to fill that out. If you want to learn more about beekeeping, if you want additional seminars, you want additional information, or even just a topic outside of beekeeping, please include that too, because then we'll use that as we develop future seminars with Nina. Okay, perfect. Thank you all. Take care. Have a good night and happy beekeeping or happy we talked you out of beekeeping. Either one, you pick. So thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Take care. Bye.